ArchDaily and Strelka is kind of the same age. We started 10 years ago, and you started something 9 years ago. And you're the biggest in terms of the audience and in terms of the country coverage, architectural source for different projects, architect's name, and etc. But still, you kind of media. How do you think media changed, especially for your type of the audience and for architecture for these years?
We start as media because media was the main way for architects to exchange knowledge. This is a profession that you could say is very scientific. The architecture media was being produced in the centers in London, New York, Boston, Milan, and then sent to the rest of the world in a very colonial way. It's like, this is what you have to do. But the internet allowed to break the centrality, and for us that was the main importance of doing ArchDaily. And we think that our biggest contribution to the world has to make this cross-pollination in a very decentralized way. That is why today architects from around the world are being inspired by what is happening in Indonesia, Iran, Russia, which are not the usual sources of architectural inspiration, you will say. 10 years ago, we were reading about the BRIC economy, Brazil, Russia, India, China, countries that were growing like crazy in terms of economy and therefore in construction. So something was there in terms of architecture. And I was reading about this new school called Strelka, starting in Russia. And with my partner, David Asail, we said, we have to go to Russia. We came here when there was this boom, and it was incredible for us to see it at the same time that we were going to Brazil or to China to witness that here. But for us, it was very interesting to come here to the Red October Island to visit this school that said architecture, design, and media. And we were wondering, as a media at the time, why is media so important?
I guess for us, when we started Strelka, media was actually hugely important because we wanted to broadcast the knowledge, the ideas, the new name, the famous name, basically to boost up the discussion about the city, about the importance of public space, about the importance of quality of air, quality of water in the city, the affordable housing, the landscape projects. So all of this we thought should be not only the question which only architects and urbanism is meditated on, but it has to be much more broader. So the decision makers should be aware of this, developers of different kinds should be aware of this, the young generation should be aware of this. So we wanted to involve as many different audience as possible and to get them to be interested in the city and in architecture as one of the instruments of how you could actually develop and build the city. Coming back to ArchDaily, do you have any statistics in terms of your audience? What kind of architecture do they like?
This is interesting because the internet, open platforms offer the possibility of this user-generated content, and today the biggest media is that. But here comes a crucial part of ArchDaily because we provide an open channel, but there is a curator in between. But at the same time, acknowledging that the architecture profession is very diverse. So sometimes even a small, humble project being done in the city center of an unknown city can help another architect, much as a big museum in a European city can do. So in this aspect, we try to always understand also the data, because we have humans doing this curation in Chile, in Europe, Asia, the US. But at the end is how do they make a good use of the data to understand what are the things that our users are needing. And here is perhaps our biggest learning in the last year. When we see that we have a split between architects and also some non-architects who come to our platform. But through the data, we're understanding this trend that is happening in the world where much more people are trying to enter into architecture, not being architects. This is a trend that is growing more and more, especially when people are putting much more effort or passion into their concept of their home or building a second home. And this is growing, growing, and growing.
When you say non-architects, who do you actually mean? It's like, who are the other professionals who are using the ArchDaily?
I will say it's like prosumers. It's these advanced consumers of something. People are saying, I want to work with an architect. I want to remodel my house. What can I get? Where can I see inspiration? How can I buy something? And all of this is available online. And when you are Googling about interesting case study of a house, an interesting interior, or an inspiring space, you're going to find the same that an architect is looking into these terms. So it's becoming like a more common arena.
In Russia, like 70% of architecture is done by non-architects. So it's not really artistic, and it's kind of mass production. And I assume that it's roughly the same in most of the countries. Is this content of mass production architecture, which is done by non-architects, by, let's say, no-name big companies, has some kind of space in ArchDaily, or how do you treat this type of the content?
Well, for us, we cannot be in a bubble and not acknowledge it. And I think it's very important to understand it, because at the end, this is an industry driven by efficiency.
Yeah.
A developer doesn't want to cause, let's say, harm, but he wants to do things in an efficient way. And in this efficiency-driven society, it is good to look back how we got here. In the post-war era, and I think that this is very present here, there had to be a very big reconstruction, rebuilding, to output a lot of housing for a lot of people. And at that time, we embraced the machine, the lines of production, where you could design something modular and you could repeat it and make it scale. So everything the same in a modular way. And what is happening today with production? You can still have very efficient lines of output, but you can do customization with the same efficiency. And especially I see a big potential here in Russia, because the big developers want to be more efficient and they want to embrace technology and to adapt to the new needs of consumers. Today, if you're a techie person, you say, oh, I want to enter into influence the world, something, go to work in a big startup, be a software developer. But now you can apply this kind of thinking to do buildings.
Yes.
It used to be very inefficient, but now with BIM, positive thing about these technologies that at the end, more than creating something that is very specific, is something very open that interconnects and allows many stakeholders to take part. I think that this is a good evolution in terms of technology because of that. It's enabling a very diverse group of people to interact around the building.
Yeah, it's actually very much resonate with Strelka vision and the way how we do the things. Everything should be open as much as possible, and whatever you do, your research project or your public program, or you do the books, it has to be open for as much audience as possible. But it also gives, quite a huge possibility for non-architects, who usually the decision makers like developers or city authorities, to look at the project in a more 3D way. And so they actually can read it much more easily instead of just looking only in plans, which also kind of opened the profession for much bigger contribution. Because right now what I see and what I see in Moscow and other Russian cities, that if you take any other city project, whatever it would be, park, street, or even the affordable housing, everybody would like to make their own contribution. So it's not only the architects, it's also, the people, the economists, psychology, anthropology, so like a different audience, everybody would like to contribute. And the most interesting project, which I'm driven, which I quite often read through your ArchDaily, is kind of this community project when people basically get themselves in a community, and when they have the architects as one of the elements of this community, and then they started to create this team effort. How do you think architects could expand their influence on different subjects? I don't know, ecology, as just Arabi recently announced that architects should make the contribution to climate change and other questions. And you have a huge community of architects who could actually give this contribution.
Yes, this is important because in a way what you're saying with this desire of Riva to address climate change, okay, architects are related to buildings, construction is the biggest emitter of CO2. If we go deeper into that initiative, for example, is to ask, what is an architect? And during this specialization of professionals, the architect became the person who has to draw something that needs to be built. But in our training to achieve that, we have learned a lot about what we call today design thinking. And we have the very valuable tool of abstraction. So we can address problems. Now we do it in the form of buildings or cities, but this is something that is needed across society. And you see architects doing tech startups that will address construction problems, a very obvious evolution, but you are also seeing them entering into other industries, being project managers, being interface designers, and entering through these skills into other problems. So I am very positive about how this faces the constant question. Maybe there are too many architects in the world. Today, the people who are making society advance are they're very brave. The fact that we have somebody as Elon Musk thinking, we need to conquer other planets, we need to extend humanity, that requires braveness and a little bit of craziness as well.
I totally support this. For me, the architecture is not much more than just a building. It's actually, the kind of state of thinking, approach to the way how you think, and the beauty and huge possibility which architects has, that they actually can imagine anything in a space. Even if you take any other professions, this is a particular skills which architects have, especially with this blending of our lifestyle between material world and digital world. This way how the architects train to think is could applied in many different areas. And I totally a strong believer that this particular skills to understand the space. By saying space, I mean not only the flat building or, city. I'm saying, planet, if you want. Different planets, if you want.
And you say maybe this output of the traditional architect in terms of construction is not feasible anymore. But the positive thing is to see this trend, to understand that the role of the architect is changing and evolving. My first encounter with Russia was Moscow, this big capital of the world that has always been in the unconscious. You think about the capitals of the world, it is New York, London, Sao Paulo, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Moscow. I remember when I came the first time, Moscow city was very intense. It was a messy city center where the public was left over. It was everything about the private. But after these 10 years, Moscow city has become a capital that has embraced public spaces. It is a much more beautiful city with order. Pedestrians exist, they have a voice. You see even public bike system, a very rich new park system. The streets are being taken care of. How do you see the influence of Strelka and the graduates on this change of the city?
I think we've been kind of, pioneers of this movement. And the movement was basically that before this 10 years, everything in Russia and in Moscow was about your private comfort, your beautiful car, your nice flat. So you didn't really care much the way how you walk on the streets, the public transport as soon as you get your own car. You also had the opportunity to travel quite a lot. So you've seen all these cities, which you mentioned, London, Hong Kong, New York. You basically started to compare Moscow with the comfort of life, the street comfort of life, and other cities. You immediately see like a huge gap. So I think that we kind of really helped and pioneered and kind of, I don't know, kicked off this movement that change should be done. And it could start with the public space, with the parks, with the streets, so that you would feel comfortable, safe, funny, free, not only in your nice flat or nice car, inside of your nice car, but also in the city in itself. It was really widely supported because we changed the mayor of Moscow. He has a very great skill of urbanism on a decision-making level. Have you seen anything else apart of Moscow? What could you tell about the other cities of Russia?
Have also had the luck to visit St. Petersburg or Dagestan. Very different context. And what I came to understand, this is a very big territory. It spans from where we are in the western edge, but it goes all the way through the Pacific. So it is very diverse, it is very complex, and I am very curious to understand more of it. Now I know more about the big cities, but when I went to Dagestan and I saw how the territory needs to be, in a way, developed to make it useful and to distribute opportunities, here is a tremendous work. For the development of the city, you need authorities with commitment and with a proper vision. And something interesting I have seen from Strelka is that, graduates, they can work from here into public projects that are done from Strelka, but also that they go to work into the government and also in governments outside of Moscow. How do you see the profile of graduates who are going to places where they can influence policy making or city development?
I think Strelka, in terms of our alumni, gives a lot of possibilities if you would like to work with city authorities and be influencer and being the agent of change. But also, we explained that you could also be the agent of change when you do your own startup, when you do your own non-profit organization, when you started kind of spin-off educational projects, which could be related not only for adult researchers, but also for the kids. We have a man from Belarus. He basically came to study at Strelka a few years ago, and then he got back to Minsk, and he organized the kids' school, and he explained the kids the importance of architecture, the way how you could actually influence architecture.
And here I want to ask you, because I constantly see, Strelka has a public program, invites people, has a publishing section, a publishing department that takes care about producing books, e-books, to distribute this knowledge. How do you see the influence of Strelka? Well, first going outside the traditional architecture in the Russian context, but also having an influence outside of Russia.
I think that we most influenced outside of Russia with our research program. It's a lot of our alumni, but not only them, trying to create the their own research programs or their own educational programs. Quite a few of our Strelka alumni are doing their own startups about blockchain technology and how it could be related in cities and in architecture, and how we could use the instruments such AI in architecture, how boundaries could be much more transparent. If to compare especially Russia and the rest of the world, I guess our main influence is through people, through our Strelka alumni, through the different people who visited us, who give a lecture at us, who work with us and became the ambassadors of different type of ideas and the way how you look at things. But in terms of the real project, I guess, in Russia we're much more influenced.
Because, for example, there is Strelka KB.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell us about this other part?
It works as an urban consultancy practice. It does master plans, city strategy, city development programs like My Street or parks or anything which is related to public space. We do a huge program about the affordable housing so that it would be much more comfortable and contemporary in terms of the way how you use right now your house than it used to be for 20 years, because most of the norms in Russia didn't change since 60s, another 60 years passed. And most of the buildings which you could see, let's say in Holland, you have no way that you could actually build them in Russia. Not because you don't have architects who could not create such a, form and space and think like this, but mainly because of the regulations, which is working right now totally against of any types of ideas. And when I'm talking about the ideas, I'm not mentioning only the aesthetic spots. It's also, this issue of ecology, issue of comfort, issue of security. KB works on this short-term and long-term city programs of different size, trying to push the industry, or let's say turn them into architects.
And also I want to ask you about the structure that supports Strelka, because Strelka has a CEO, not a dean.
Yeah.
Why is that?
In terms of the regulation, we non-governmental educational institute. So we don't have to follow any educational rules in terms of the organizational structure, and that we have to create the program and then follow this program for the rest of our lives. And then to imply different changes takes you ages. We have a dean, which is Benjamin Bratton right now, but he is mainly responsible for research and educational program. We don't involve our students in commercial projects because they came here, and we think that our main responsibility and basically the social contract which we make with them is that this education is totally philanthropic. They come for 5 months. They do pure research, and so the freedom of ideas would not be faced with this regulation reality, because when you come to the real projects, most of the often things you hear like, yeah, that's a nice idea, but we have this regulation, and this regulation, and we don't have any energy to change these regulations. So can you do something cool, but so that we wouldn't have to change the system of our regulations? So which actually wouldn't really move your ideas on a different level. And we would like our students to move on a different level.
You mentioned many times about this heavy weight of the structure in Russia. There is even a very big historical background that can be a heavy weight on the shoulders of the young architects. What do you think could be a positive aspect of all this baggage?
I think, part of our identity, which needs to be reflected and researched by people. It comes from this heavy structure, but also, being a hero. It's also part of our, I would say, kind of Russian DNA. I like the braveness which was in avant-garde time, and I think this braveness is a great sense of architecture which young generation needs right now. And when I'm saying brave, I mean brave not only in terms of that they kind of changed the style of architecture completely, but it's also the way how they think about the architecture, how it could contribute to the people's life, how it could change cities, how it could change construction industry. Because right now, mostly architects think how they could actually adjust themselves to the construction industry. I know that it's really heavy and it's difficult and etc. But in our past, we used to be very brave in our thinking. So I guess this is definitely the kind of a DNA of Russian architects, which could be applied right now as well.
From here, it is, for me, it is very interesting to see how two, let's say, companies who were born at the same time, but in very different contexts, have evolved into what is happening today, understanding from our own corners how we can contribute to the world of architecture and to cities and to these future people who are not going to be precisely architects engaging into the development of architecture.
It would be in the future, I believe, like a mathematics. So everybody would learn how to understand this and how to think about this. So this is kind of what I think of huge contribution of architects and architecture.
A good example, because from mathematics, you can go into everything.
Yeah.
So even music.
Yes, exactly.